Hello, this is David Sloan Wilson for Evolution, This View of Life, the magazine that approaches anything and everything from an evolutionary perspective. I am very pleased to introduce Gabrielle Principe. Did I say it right, Gabrielle?
You got it right, thank you.
Our new education editor for Evolution, This View of Life, so welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
And you have many distinctions. First and foremost, let's say that you're a mother of two. You are a developmental psychologist by training. You are chair of the psychology department at Ursinus College in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And you have come to approach child development and education from an evolutionary perspective and have written about it for a general audience in your book titled Your Brain on Childhood: The Unexpected Side Effects of Classrooms, Ballparks, Family Rooms, and the Minivan.
Of course, the minivan.
Which receives high marks on Amazon.com for accessibility. The reviews say, "Oh, I thought this would be a boring science book, but actually, it's a great read." So Gabrielle, let's begin by having you tell us just how you came to approach child development and education from an evolutionary perspective.
Sure. Well, my degree's in developmental psychology, so I've always thought about individual development, but during my training, during my second year of graduate school, I had a seminar with Gilbert Gottlieb at UNC Greensboro, and his seminar absolutely spun the way that I looked at development, and no longer looked at development as something that happened at birth or happened at or begun at birth or begun at conception, but rather begun way back, and the development was a process that goes on for eons. So his seminar really was the kernel of me beginning to think about things from an evolutionary perspective, and the reason why I began to think about things like child rearing or education from an evolutionary perspective started with that, but also has a lot to do with something that you mentioned already, is that I'm a parent. I have an 8-year-old son and a 12-year-old girl, and I began to notice that sometimes their teachers were behaving, say, oddly, or friends of mine who were parents were behaving oddly. And by behaving oddly, I mean we're doing things that didn't fit well with the way in which evolution designed humans' brains and their bodies to develop. So I just began thinking about those issues, and once I got tenure at Ursinus and had a bit of time to do something different and write something different, that's exactly why I wrote the book that you mentioned.
Right. So let's get some examples. What are some of parents in schools doing that really don't make much sense from a evolutionary perspective?
Well, so let's talk about schools since we're talking about education. Things, for example, like homework. In my children's school district piles it on from very early on, even in kindergarten. My daughter now is in 6th grade, and there's been evenings where she's had hours of homework.
Right.
There's no empirical evidence that demonstrates that work after the school day has ended, does anything to boost learning or boost test scores. If anything, it hurts it, and particularly for the younger children. And the reason being, it's not that homework is bad in and of itself, but that it takes away time from other sorts of experiences that children need to develop into healthy, successful older children and adults. So it takes away from time for play and active.
Have there been good studies that demonstrate no effect?
There's been a number of studies that demonstrate that there's no effect at all in the elementary school years, but things are a bit different
A point to
later.
make here, a point to make, because I've been also have a strong interest in education, and I think it's important to point out that when you look at the quality of research um, in education, it spans the range from the worst to the best. It would be wrong to say that it's all bad, but
Right.
it would not be wrong to say that lots of it is bad.
Right. No.
And so,
Yeah.
but there are wonderful, rigorous studies, and so the question is, is there, is there, does homework have an effect, positive or negative? Um, we simply, need to know, has good research been done? And it's quite possible that it has, and so there is a kind of a definitive answer that, strange as it might seem, there's no point in doing homework necessarily. That might be the result.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think, first of all, I think it's really difficult to comb through the literature. And I think it's really difficult for, if not impossible, for educators, for teachers to comb through the literature. And I think it's difficult, too, for educators to deal with, parents who perhaps might not be so happy if their sixth grader comes home without any homework and might think that their teachers aren't doing their job correctly if their sixth grader's not coming home with homework. So yeah.
So I think the one thing that fascinates me about this is that it seems that theory trumps instinct. It's not as if that we have instincts that unprompted cause us to raise our kids right. It is true that we have theories that make sense, and so the prevailing narrative or theory is there's all this stuff to learn, and the earlier you can do it, the better. The more you pile it on, the faster we learn. And if your son or daughter learns to read when they're 4, that must mean they're so terribly smart. It must mean that they're little geniuses because they learn at 4, not 6. All of these are sort of ideas and narratives that make sense of the world, basically, and that would cause us to think that if little Tommy doesn't come home with homework in the first grade, that there's something wrong with the system and the teachers aren't doing their job, right? And all of that could be terribly, terribly wrong, and you'd never know it because it's not part of the narrative.
Yeah, right, absolutely. And I mean, I think as a parent, I think all parents absolutely want the best for their children. And as you said, it's really disconcerting if you have, a 4-year-old and the 2-year-old down the block is reading Harry Potter and your child can't even, read simple, simple sentences. It's difficult to deal. That's a scary feeling, particularly because, the world is competitive. Not every child can get into Harvard or something like that. And if you see your children slipping behind or not performing up to their peers at any age, as a parent, that's unsettling. And if you contrast that with, ideas, theories, and research that demonstrate that there's no good reason to hurt your childhood, that fear that parents have it's still there and it doesn't go away.
Well, that's why it's reassuring. I mean, I think that's an important function of what we're trying to do with Evolution, the History of Life, is to show that there's, to provide a new narrative, basically, that here's it's perfectly okay to do that. In fact, it might be better to do this,
Right.
and to provide a kind of an authority to that, so that a parent does not need to feel bad
Right.
if they do that. All of this is part of growing up too fast, right? I mean, so that's something we discussed beforehand. So let's talk a little bit like speeding up knowledge and speeding up childhood as an idea which actually we should be skeptical about, and we should kind of rethink that. You want to just elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one major idea in evolutionary developmental psychology, and David Bjorklund writes about this just beautifully in one of his texts, and the idea is that childhood is an adaptation that humans have that gives us the time and the ability to develop into flexible thinking humans. So if you look at the amount of time that humans compared to other species have in which we're neurologically immature, it's long. So we're in this period of immaturity for a very long time. And there's reasons to think that's adaptive. Because we're in this long period of immaturity, it's a long period in which our brains can be shaped and molded, and we can pick up the skills and the knowledge that we need to be successful children, older children, and adults, and we need that time to do it. And if you think of childhood as an adaptation that evolution has given us to make sure that our brains get hooked up right, there's really no good reason to hurry up childhood.
And what's the role of play in this?
Well, if you think about, play, if you think about play today, even going back, say, a generation to when, I was younger or you were younger, play has truly changed in lots of ways, right? So if I think about the childhood that my children are experiencing, there's a lot of scripted toys, toys with batteries, there's lots of organized sports. So play just has a very different flavor than it used to. A generation ago or 2 generations ago. But if you go way back, and think about the sorts of play that humans have been doing for the majority of our existence, it's been very different. It's been, children pretty much, wandering around in packs of different age children, just being on their own and being free. So making up their own games, their own rules, calling their own fouls. There's not that much that happens anymore.
Right.
And then the other side of the other thing to talk about is there's growing work that demonstrates that play is a context in which children learn a range of social and cognitive skills. It's a context in which they learn those skills, and it's a very motivating yet demanding context that doesn't happen in other sorts of settings. So play is important.
Right, and so the idea that we can that we in formal education that we reduce play might be another one of these ill-advised strategies. Makes sense, has surface logic. You're not learning enough. You got to keep your nose to the grindstone, but in fact that might be a bad idea. Is there good research on that, as far as you know, demonstrating that when you reduce recess, actually it has a backfiring effect?
Yeah, so I think recess and play are sort of two different things. I mean, so there's some work by Kathy Hirsch-Piesek at Temple and her colleagues that demonstrate, for instance, and just as an example of one study, that children use more sophisticated language when they're playing with peers than when they're playing with adults. But if you talk about recess, there's some early work, for instance, by Stevenson and Lee that demonstrates that in cultures where there's more recess, that it seems to be the case that children achieve better in the classroom context. And there's been some experimental work as well that's demonstrated with younger children that more recess, doesn't do what some teachers or parents might think. It doesn't make children become more active in the classroom immediately following recess. That it does the opposite. That it serves to be a place where children can kind of wind down when they get back to the classroom, tend to be able to pay better attention, which then leads to better learning.
Right, and so that just makes me think of so-called attention deficit disorder. Have you thought much about that? Whether that's a true disorder or maybe perhaps a response to an unusual environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly it's a true disorder, but it's certainly the case that the classroom and its demands is probably something that the really young brain hasn't expected to find itself in, or didn't evolve to find itself in. So if you think about the demands of, say, a kindergarten classroom, children are asked to be quiet for long amounts of time, to not touch one another. They're asked to sit still, be quiet, fill out worksheets. memorize things like that. So a lot of children who are naturally curious, naturally playful, perhaps have unsophisticated ability to pay sustained attention. Those are natural qualities of, say, a 5-year-old. But if you put a 5-year-old with those natural qualities in a classroom context, they may look as if they have ADHD. So perhaps it may be the case that since we put children at really young ages into these contexts that demand children to sit still and to pay attention, that we may be misdiagnosing ADHD
Right.
to some extent.
And so, what are some of the themes that you would like to stress for this section? Some of the people that you'd like to interview, some of the topics that you'd like to get on the table, so that we can present this view of education to the general public.
Well, I think it would be interesting to play through the ways in which I think that humans have evolved to naturally learn, and to play through the fact that the context in which a lot of children learn, particularly in public schools, is probably very, very different from the way in which we've evolved to learn. So, for more than 99% of human existence, children have been learning in context. They've been learning new skills on the job. They've been learning in meaningful context. They've been learning through guided apprenticeship with folks that they know very well. They learn through their own active discovery, self-exploration. They learn through experimentation, through trial and error. And there's not a lot of that goes on in today's classroom. So I think it would be really interesting to play through, to talk about the ways in which we evolved to learn, what modern learning contexts look like, and where this discrepancy came from, why there's this huge gap between these sorts of evolutionary ideas and research and what actually goes on in the classroom.
That'd be great. And who are some of the people we can look forward to hearing from? You mentioned a few of them already. David Borkland. Maybe just say a little bit about the stars in this field that we hope to make better known among the general public.
Yeah, I think it would be very fun to talk with David Bjorklund and Anthony Pellegrini about his research, for instance, on recess. Would be interesting to talk about. I mentioned Kathy Hirsch-Pasek as well. I don't think that she... actually, she does explicitly talk about evolution a bit in some of her work. And I think it would be fun to get to talk with her as well, because she talks a bunch about the benefits of play in young children's learning. So that would be fun to do too, I think.
Part of the backstory here, for some of our viewers will know this, but others won't, is that whole topics such as developmental psychology, huge topics, many hundreds of researchers, only some of them explicitly think about development from an evolutionary perspective. And often what they do is hugely relevant, but that's how new, basically, evolution is a way of thinking about these things, that there'll be many individuals, basically, doing tremendously relevant research, and yet they themselves are not thinking about it in the way that you are, thanks to a single seminar that you took when you were in college, based on someone, Gilbert Gottlieb, another interesting person to interview, who does think about development from an evolutionary perspective in humans and non-humans alike. And the added value of the explicit evolutionary perspective is, of course, something that we're hoping to draw out. It's some viewers might also find it as curious that we're not actually talking about teaching evolution. We're talking about using evolution to teach. And teaching evolution is another important topic. We don't mean to exclude it from this section. And of course, we have our wonderful colleagues, Eugenie Scott and the National Council for Science Education, Center for Science Education, whose mission is to ensure the good teaching of evolution in the classrooms. And we'll be featuring that work as well, but the primary focus of the education section of this magazine is education of all topics and how we can teach our children basically the best way possible from an evolutionary perspective. Well, Gabrielle, I look forward to seeing you again on the pages of Evolution This Year of Life, and it has been great having this conversation with you.
My pleasure. Thank you, David.
See you later.
All right.